traveling to places where people have so little in the way of material possessions has changed my perspective on living in a country and in a family where I have access to a lot of material possessions.
Welcome to a new episode of Most Memorable Journeys. My guest today is a very, very fascinating young man. The most fascinating about him is that he wrote his first book at the age of 12. And in the meantime, he has written 8 books and he has done a ton of other things. He graduated high school at 16. He has his own YouTube channel. He's traveled the world. And I'm really, really excited to talk to him today. Welcome to Most Memorable Journeys, Solomon Schmidt.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm excited to be with you.
So we were talking before we recorded, because I'm from Switzerland and I'm very familiar with German names. Schmidt is as German as it gets. And what is it again? Your great-grandparents?
I believe my great-grandparents on my father's side were from Germany, and then my father's mother came from Austria. She came to Ellis Island when she was 5.5. Yes, I have a very German last name, Schmidt, but then, of course, a very Jewish first name. My book on Alan Dershowitz, who, of course, is a very prominent Jewish man, as I wrote that book and met a lot of different members of the Jewish community or the Jewish people, that was interesting because, like in one case, I had an elderly Jewish lady who was a spy for the Allies during World War II, a French Jewish spy. Her name was Marta Cohen, and she went behind enemy lines to deliver information about Nazi troop movements to the Allies. She spoke fluent German and she had blonde hair. So the Nazis never found out she was Jewish. So fast forward 80 years later, I met her at an event in California when she was 102.
Oh, my God.
Just over 4 feet tall, in a wheelchair, and hard of hearing. But when I told her, Miss Cohn, it's an honor to meet you. My name is Solomon Schmidt. She craned her neck and turned towards me. She looked me right in the eyes, and she said, "Those two names don't go together."
They don't.
Well, yes, but in a very corny sounding way. They do, because the amazing thing is the Jewish people are still here, even though Hitler tried to destroy them. And that fact dawned on me because that fact really hit me because I had members of my family who were in the extended relatives who were in the German army during World War II. They weren't SS officers. I don't think, as far as I know, they participated. They actually killed Jewish people with their bare hands or anything like that. But that fact did hit home with me, Elizabeth, and that was very moving to consider.
Oh my God, you said a lot. I've already.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No. I love it when you say a lot, but I already have a ton of questions. Now, the first thing that I want to ask you, how did this history fascination start? I mean, you're obviously very, very gifted and clever. That's why you wrote the book when you were so young. But what made you want to know all these things?
I have always loved stories. I'm very grateful. I have parents who were able to afford to buy me lots of books and give me a fantastic education. Particularly, I had a mother who is a retired teacher, and she's just great with little kids. And so when I was young, I mean, I'm right now as I speak, I'm in my our office here at our home, and around me are tons and tons of books. So I had parents, particularly a mother, who was always giving me books. She was literally reading to my siblings and I when we were in her womb, and always been around stories. And I can remember when I was very young, I can see the picture books in my head that I used to love, of Statue of Liberty, the Titanic, Ronald Reagan, lots of different people and events from history that first inspired me to write my book, U.S. History Bites, which is the one I wrote when I was 12. And that was after a conversation I had with my dad, Mike, when I was trying to figure out what could I put my time and energy into, because I wasn't good at sports. And I had a lot of different ideas to make board games or make movies. And he knew I loved history more than anything and said, "Why don't you write a book for kids your age about US history?" And I did it and I self-published it. And once again, I had parents who were financially able to support me going to conferences where I set up tables and in a warehouse with lots of other vendors and people selling their products at booths. I would stand at my table, wait for customers to walk by, stop them, tell them about my History Bite series, and try to sell them the books. So I've done that for the last 8 years, 9 years, been to many different conferences and sold my self-published History Bite series that way. But that was only because I had parents who were able and willing to support me at that level. So for that, I'm hugely grateful.
That's beautiful because, many kids have everything financed and have all their studies financed, but you don't often hear it that they are really, really grateful for it. Many just take it for granted, right?
Right. And it's, Elizabeth, when you talk about traveling, I've been to countries where there is a significant level of poverty, particularly Nepal, which is very famous for being the home of Mount Everest. And traveling to places where people have so little in the way of material possessions has changed my perspective on living in a country and in a family where I have access to a lot of material possessions. So there's another thing I'm grateful for, being able to see places in the world where people suffer daily. That changes your perspective on life.
Travel makes you humble. I have learned
Mm.
that. I was a tour guide when I was young. You said that
Oh,
you were studying my what I did, and I lived in some of those countries. And I have been to Nepal, and I absolutely agree with you. I have been to India and many other places where some of the things that we have and we absolutely take for granted, do not exist or are very hard to get. Or people who have to walk, I don't know, 2 hours to get fresh water, or so many things. And do you know that? What is it? If you have a roof over your head and electricity and water and a little food in your fridge and a little money, you're like part of 8% of the world's
wow.
population.
It's staggering. And that, I'm sure you're the same way, Elizabeth. That makes me want to do something about it. And not to, and this is not to brag, but one of the projects I've been working on with some friends the last few years is creating an educational workbook called JAPA, JAPA. And it's a combination of the first names of my friend Appa Sherpa, who summited Mount Everest 21 times and is very famous in Nepal and does a lot of work to advance education there. And it's also a combination of the first name of Jane Goodall, who is a friend of mine who studied chimpanzees in Africa and has become a world-renowned scientist and philanthropist. And together with their foundations, my friends and I have been creating and distributing an educational workbook to advance education in rural parts of Nepal. And the workbook has lessons in English, math, Nepalese history, nutrition, conservation, and it's going to kids, or we're trying to get it to kids who don't have access to as quality of education or schooling as they need in order to pursue other jobs than simply what they have always grown up doing, which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying farming or working in the mountains or anything like that is a bad thing. But in this day and age, when you take Nepal and you have kids who potentially could have access to a college in Kathmandu or other parts of the country, or can learn English and then get access to higher paying jobs. We live in a world now where those things are a possibility, even in as difficult a country as Nepal. So my friends and I are working to help in a small way through that JAPA workbook. And I'm sure you, Elizabeth, and anyone who travels to countries where life is very difficult, it makes you want to do something, and even if it's small.
Oh, I totally agree. And I remember that from my times as a tour guide when I was traveling with people through these countries. And, the Swiss are wealthy people. They are people with a good income. And I think the Swiss also have a bit of a helper syndrome. We always want to help. When there's something happens in the world, we are the first ones to help. And I used to sort of, I actually had to stop them sometimes from giving things at the wrong place because, it's one thing wanting to help, but then giving money to kids in the streets in India is not a good idea because it causes chaos and it doesn't go where it's supposed to go. But I used to take my tour groups to Mother Teresa's orphanage, and I once met her.
Wow, what was that like?
I didn't meet her. I mean, I'm talking about meeting her. I was there in the lobby waiting for the tour, and she came down the stairs and she said hello.
Wow,
But it was
wow.
fascinating. And you know how much I would pay if I had a selfie? But that was in 1989. There were no
Yes.
selfies at the time.
Well, that's priceless. You have a memory, and you met one of the great people in the history of the world. So that's something to cherish and hold on to, which I'm sure you do. And it's fascinating. We share again, not to toot my own horn, but we share a common bond with the tour guiding, Elizabeth. I'm not sure if you know, but I run a pretty much annual tour through England and Scotland through my
I
company,
read
History
that. I
by
want to know
Tours.
more about that.
Well, it stems from my passion for the life and works of J.R.R. Tolkien, the British author who wrote The Lord of the Rings, C.S. Lewis, the author of The Chronicles of Narnia, and J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, whom I'm working on a biography of right now. So I designed this itinerary where guests and I go to the places where those three authors lived, wrote their books, received inspiration. So we all fly into London. We spend some time in London and then go down to Bournemouth on the southern coast. We stay in a hotel where Tolkien wrote parts of his books. We go up to Oxford, the home of Tolkien and Lewis, then north to Edinburgh, where J.K. Rowling famously worked on Harry Potter as a single mother on welfare in cafes, and then northwest into the Scottish Highlands, where we ride the Jacobite steam train, which is regarded as one of the most breathtaking train journeys in the world, and is called Hogwarts Express, and was used on some level in the shooting of the Harry Potter films. So so far I've only run two of those tours, but I'm pleased to say they went really well, and we got a lot of really great feedback on our TripAdvisor page. And for anyone who may be listening who would have an interest in joining the tour, it's you can learn more about it at historybites.com/tour, historybites.com/tours. But
I
yeah,
I'm
that is
going to
my work.
I'm going to put that website in the show notes so people
Thank
can
you.
find it there. And but I want to ask, in order to join these tours, you don't have to be American. You could join. Do you have to fly with you, or could you join in England? Could you join from anywhere?
You can join from anywhere. We had folks last year come from Malta.
Okay, so you don't have to. You could actually meet you at the airport or at the hotel where the
Yes.
tour starts. Yeah.
Yes, we all meet at the hotel, our hotel near Heathrow Airport on a Friday night. We have a little introductory get together in the lobby. It's a great time, and then we set off on our bus the next morning and spend the next several days just seeing the best that the UK has to offer. It's not, it's Elizabeth. It's not just sites related to Tolkien, Lewis, and Rowling. It's also Stonehenge, Big Ben, the chalk cliffs on the southern coast, Edinburgh Castle, and other scenic and historic sites. I love it. I'm sure my guess is we share that love for doing tours. It's so fun being with like-minded people in a beautiful place, just chilling out and enjoying God's world and his history and great stories and hopefully good weather and good
But
food.
yeah, I think, are you thinking of just doing the UK and Scotland, or you should do more of these tours? Are you thinking of expanding into other countries with that? Because that sounds fascinating.
It's a possibility. At this point, I'm so focused on my biography of J.K. Rowling that I simply can't add any others. But for right now, what I like about the itinerary is that I've had time now to hone it in and to comb through the fine details of the tour. Little things of hour to hour that you only learn by being on the ground and doing it multiple times. So I really like, and the folks who have come on the tours seem to really like the itinerary we've put together. And the hotels are stupendous, 4 and 5 star hotels. The food is terrific. 5 star restaurant the first day, and I think a 4 or 5 star restaurant the last day, and then a lot of really excellent places in between. Pubs where Shakespeare went, things like that.
You make me want to join.
Oh,
Tell
what the
me, have you ever met J.K. Rowling in
No,
person?
no. And I was told by her through her agent that for not personal reasons, she does not want to authorize biographies at this time. So we did not have any, she didn't tell me to cease and desist or anything like that. She simply told me she wouldn't participate. But the good news is there are a number of resources available that I'm tapping into, and also interviews with different people I have tracked down who have known her at different points in her life, where I think I can I think the end result is going to be a compelling story if I can finish writing it that way. Her life is so inspiring and fascinating that you just have to get out of the way. You just have to write the story, and it'll speak for itself.
Mhm.
I,
Mhm. I
I I
think
believe.
it inspires a lot of people because she was poor. I mean, she was broke basically when she started writing, and I
Yes,
think many people who are thinking of starting to write, this is really a call to action. Write, whatever for whatever it's worth. And I think even if it never gets anywhere, but it's good for us to, use our brain and write. I want to talk about your YouTube channel because I've seen that like one of the interviews you did was with Jane Goodall and some other fascinating people. Do you record in person or do you also record like we do here now on Zoom?
when I can, I always want to record in person. So it
Mhm.
just depends on the particular guest. Dr. Jane was in person. It was a combination of circumstances that worked out, again, for which I'm very thankful. Name dropping alert. Mike Tyson was in person. Mike Huckabee, who was the governor of Arkansas and a presidential candidate, and whose daughter is a very prominent Republican politician now too, Sarah. He was in person, and some other folks have been by Zoom. If any of your listeners are in the UK, they might be familiar with William Moseley. He's an actor who was King Peter in the Chronicles of Narnia series. Really nice guy from the Cotswolds. That was by Zoom during COVID. So it just depends. How about you, Elizabeth? I mean, besides
Well,
our
I
interview,
I do mostly on Zoom, but I have done a few in person. Like, there were actually two elderly gentlemen here in Cyprus that I recorded, and they weren't going to go on Zoom. And I went to visit them. And of course, I would like to do more of that, but I live
yes,
on an island and it's not so easy to travel. But I'm enjoying this, and I can see that you are enjoying this too, because I think we like people, and because
yes,
we like stories. I like
yes,
stories like you do. And
yes.
when you take the time to listen to people, you learn so much.
Absolutely. And the you're totally right about liking people, and you learn interesting stories from people from all walks of life, no matter how much or little money they have, no matter how much fame or little fame they have, no matter if they're happy, sad, angry. You can, if like you just said, if you're listening and trying to learn people's stories, sometimes you gain wisdom from unlikely places. My dad has a quote which could come off as a little rude, but he doesn't mean it this way. He says, even an old fool has some wisdom to offer. And his point is, even someone who's potentially looked down upon or has had a hard life can still give you nuggets of insight and wisdom if you're willing to listen. And so I think we're on the same page with that.
Yeah, and maybe that old fool isn't an old fool. That's the other thing, sometimes
Right.
when you actually, because people are so easily labeled, and when you
Yes.
actually start listening to somebody, you really find out what's behind that person. And everybody has a story. Everybody has a story. There is something. And, you just look at the person, you don't see inside what happened to them. And that's what I love about people.
I couldn't agree with you more. And the the greatest people I've read about in terms of people who are famous or wealthy or renowned or accomplished people, folks that I've met like Dr. Jane and Mike Tyson, who have been honored tremendously and have had achieved much success. They are so down to earth and kind and humble.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the great people of the world, the people who do amazing things for other people and keep their feet on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, not in all circumstances. We know we're all, pick your word, fallen, flawed human beings. So that's not to canonize them, but in the case of them and in the case of other folks that I'm sure you and I have met, another person who comes to my mind is Jocko Willink, who was a Navy SEAL and an author and podcaster here in the States. He was so kind to me when I was 16 years old. He did an interview on my YouTube channel, and I have a small channel, Elizabeth, so it was very kind of him to come on. He didn't need it. He was already famous. He didn't need the interview. He did it for me, and that was so gracious and and other people along the way too, folks that your listeners may not be familiar with, just friends of mine. Bill Potter, who's an older historian friend of mine, who's mentored me and who's helped me with my book projects free of charge, never asking for a reciprocal favor, doing it as a friend. And oh, that's just so meaningful.
That's beautiful. Do you have a dream interview partner? If you could choose anybody in the world, who would it be?
To interview
Yes.
J.K. Rowling.
Uh, Here we go. Maybe she's
Yes.
listening. Maybe she listens to my podcast. Who knows?
Well, if she is Miss Rowling, please contact me. No, I'm kidding. But no, I am serious. It would be J.K. Rowling. It would be a real pleasure to talk with her and to get her story firsthand. But since I need to respect that won't happen, and those are her wishes at this time, I would say off the top of my head, Barack Obama.
Oh, I would agree with you. I'd like Michelle as well, if I could.
Which, that's not to get political. I've interviewed people for this for my book on Alan Dershowitz, the Legal Gladiator book, which was released last month, Elizabeth. Again, name dropping alert. For that book, for my biography of Professor Dershowitz, I interviewed President Trump, Jamie Raskin, who's a very prominent Democratic politician, Mike Pompeo, Justice Stephen Breyer, many other people, which if folks are interested in learning about, they can see the book online. It's nothing political. When I say Obama, it's just pure fascination with
The
his life,
personality.
with his
Yes,
life, with his life story. I find anyone who rises from a very humble beginning and achieves greatness is fascinating to me on
yes.
some level. You
Yes,
see,
I absolutely agree with you. Now, I want to go back a little bit to you were saying, I mean, you're a young man and you say your mother was reading to you and you're sitting in front of a lot of books. Do you still read and do you still know people who read? Because a lot of reading has gotten lost. People are focused on their phones, focused on their laptop and what happened to the good old book reading?
that's a great question. At this point in my life, I mean, they're all great questions. So, at this point in my life, I find it harder to sit down with a book because I'm so busy writing books. But when I can, I absolutely, well, I try to make time every day to read. Not to get religious, but I do read the Bible every day in the mornings. And then at night, I try to get a little reading in with a biography. So I'm going through a biography of John Adams by David McCullough, who was one of America's greatest history writers. He passed away a couple years ago. And when it comes to my phone, I try when I can to stay off it, except for essential reasons. Or if I'm in the car, I put on a YouTube video, an interview, or a documentary to listen to, or make a phone call. But I know some people love Kindle, and occasionally I do use Kindle. My preference is to have a physical book and turn the pages.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? That isn't as important to me personally, Elizabeth. As long as folks who like reading are reading, whether it's Kindle or turning a book page, I agree that it seems, at least in my own life, I find it incredibly helpful to read books. I mean, Thomas Jefferson said, "I can't live without books." That's me
Yeah.
too.
Yes, I think that's and I think it of course comes, it's a role when your parents read, when everybody reads in the family. I think children read, and I think even though Kindle is fun and phones are fun, but I think actually holding a book and turning pages, as you say, and even smelling the smell of a library
Yes.
is fascinating.
There's something physiological about that, I'm convinced. And when you asked earlier about are there people I know who still read? Absolutely.
Hmm.
When you take Alan Dershowitz, the lawyer I wrote the biography about, he, as busy as he is, morning till night, he still finds time to take moments and go through books. And I have another friend, Bill Potter, who I mentioned earlier, who has mentored me and reviewed a lot of my books and has given me a lot of guidance when it comes to learning and studying history. He owns about 10,000 books, and he's read almost every single one of them. And he's a professional tour guide. He works for a company called Landmark Events that does history and Christian history themed tours in Ireland, Scotland, all over the United States. And he is one of the most well-read people I've ever met. And it shows, he's not pompous, but there's hardly a subject we talk about, however obscure, that he doesn't have some kind of intelligent thought to present because he's read so much and knows so much background on different people and events that he can develop a well thought out point of view or argument, even if it's a topic he hasn't read 50 books on. Reading one book gives you some thoughts to take away, whether it's John Adams or Thomas Jefferson or World War II. And that can be tough, as you know, Elizabeth, because we live in an age where we just read an article, where we don't know maybe who wrote it. We don't know where they got their information from. And that's not me saying articles are bad. It's just, books are, as we know, have been used for thousands of years to increase people's knowledge and viewpoints about the world. So I will get off my soapbox. I think people know where I think people understand my point.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what you just said about reading an article and then having an opinion on something just because of one article and you don't even know who wrote it, or if it's true. And I think, I don't know if you agree with me, but I think one of the biggest problems in today's world with all the social media and all the access to the internet is that we know too much. There are certain things that we don't need to know. I don't know. I don't know if you agree, but that's my opinion. I sometimes feel like I really don't need to know that. It's sort of it stresses me.
Mhm. I understand where you're coming from, Elizabeth, and it brings to mind a quote from C.S. Lewis, who I admire so deeply. He didn't read the newspapers. Now, this isn't me saying don't read newspapers, because I have friends who are reporters, but he would say, well, if a piece of news is important enough, someone will tell me. And then he would get back to his work and his family and reading great books that he loved to read.
Mhm.
Homer, the classic English literature, John Milton, John Bunyan, all the different books that he loved. And he would have time to read those books because he wasn't so all consumed with current events. And again, that's not me saying that that you shouldn't be concerned with current events. But the other thing that your point brought to my mind, and my train of thought has been a little derailed, but it might come back to me in a minute. I had another thought with what you were saying earlier. Elizabeth, can you remind me what you were saying a minute ago? What?
I was just saying that I feel that we know too much,
Oh,
like something happens and instantly the whole world knows about it.
I remember now what I was going to say. To your point, Elizabeth, of social media and the way you can get access to an article and then you feel like you know about it. I noticed this with myself. You can deceive yourself into thinking you know a lot about something when you don't. And I understand that we aren't experts in every phase of life. It's just not humanly possible. And we give opinions all the time about things. I give opinions all the time about topics that I haven't read 100 books on and I don't have a PhD in. However, I have to be careful personally because just like you said, when you get online or you have a platform where you can post an opinion and have people respond to it, and if it goes viral, people think, wow, well, here's something I have to listen to because it has a lot of views. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I personally, I'll speak for myself. I can deceive myself into thinking I am an expert or know about things that I have no business talking about.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same, and I know lots of people who are exactly the same. We're already getting quite close to the end, Solomon, but I
Oh
want to
my.
talk a little bit more about travel. What is next? You've traveled a lot. I didn't write down all the places that you've been to, but when I was preparing for this interview, I saw that you've also been to Tanzania. You've been to Africa. What's your take on Tanzania?
Unbelievable memories. I was blessed to take two trips to Tanzania. One was in July of 2022. My younger brother Judah, who is adopted from Ethiopia, actually, and my father Mike and I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro,
Ah,
which was an overwhelming experience. And from there, we traveled to the island of Zanzibar, which is in
mm,
the wonderfully blue, turquoise blue Indian Ocean. And then we went out to Lake Tanganyika, which is the longest lake in the world. And the reason we were there is I have my YouTube channel, History Bites, and I am currently, over many years, making a series of videos based on my book, Great Adventures History Bites, which took place around the world. And the particular adventure we were focusing on that trip was the missionary journeys of David Livingstone, who was a Scottish author, traveler, scientist, missionary who single-handedly ended the East African slave trade, which had imprisoned hundreds of thousands of Africans. So we saw a site on the island of Zanzibar, a church which is built over top of what used to be the slave market on Zanzibar. We went into the catacombs underneath the church where the slaves were kept, and it was really sad and humbling to be crouched in that cold, dark place underground and realize that slaves have been kept there. But so inspiring to think about because of one man's dedication and love and self-denial and wisdom and vision, David Livingstone, that came to an end. So that was what we were there filming about for my YouTube channel. And then the second time we went to Tanzania was in February of 2023. That's where I met Jane Goodall because Gombe National Park, where she studied chimpanzees in the 1960s, is in western Tanzania on the shores of Lake Tanganyika, which is, I think, 500 miles long. And so we met Dr. Jane by her lake house, and it goes without saying that was a once in a lifetime experience. And then that led to our interview in New York City, which is also on my YouTube channel. And my goodness, I have learned so much about life from her. And I'm sure you have people like that where heroes, they're heroes of yours, where you try to live like them, you think about them, and they inspire you to work hard, to be compassionate, to uh, to be patient, to try and be creative with your vision for your life and your your plans and adaptable and on it goes. There are so many traits that Jane Goodall has. She is a case study in not only being an incredibly smart businesswoman, but also being an incredibly compassionate and wise and thoughtful person.
Yeah, and I think all the things that you said now tells me that we must never stop trying to do good or to help people, or not to believe that, oh well, it's such, I can't make a difference. We can all make a difference, no matter how small it is. We may not all be Goodalls or Livingstones or whatever, but we can all add a little bit to make the world a better place.
Yes, we can. And to not to get religious here, but this comes to my mind. There is a quote from the book of Isaiah, the Old Testament prophet, where he says, "Learn to do justice, seek good, rebuke the oppressor, defend the fatherless and the widow." Wow, those are words to live by.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be religious. If some, not everybody is religious, but I think those being good is universal, can be universal, and it can be in any religion. And being kind to other people or being helpful to somebody who actually needs help does not need any. It doesn't need any nationality. It doesn't need any skin color. It's just human. And I think we could all be better humans if we wanted to.
Well, and it's the Michael Jackson song, "The Man in the Mirror." If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change. I think Gandhi said something like that too, didn't he?
Listen, I could talk to you for an hour now, but we're going to end it here because this was a beautiful end, what you just said. So we'll leave it at here. Maybe we'll do another one because I don't think I'm done with you yet. So I want to thank you so much for being on Most Memorable Journeys today. We're going to put all the links in the show notes. So because I'm sure many people are going to want to know more or see more about you. Solomon Schmidt, thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I'm really impressed by the things you've accomplished in your life.
If you enjoy my podcast, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. You will find all the information in the show notes.